Thank you for joining us for Working Through the Word, a ministry of the Richmond Church of Christ. Let's join our pulpit minister, Mike Johnson, as he brings today's lesson.
We talked this morning about how being people who grumble and complain adds weight to the pack of our lives as we're climbing the mountain. And we want to rid ourselves of that weight. It will weigh us down and cause all kinds of difficulties. And so the way to do that is to think about being a gracious person. I want you to look at this psalm as Caleb just read it and notice a few things. I want to suggest to you that this is a psalm where the psalmist tells us, let me tell you about a good man. Here's a good man. Verse 1, he fears the Lord. He delights in His word. He passes on a legacy, verses 2 through 3, to his family. Verse 4, and 5, he is gracious. We're going to consider that in a moment. He is one who endures. He will not be shaken, verse number 6. He's not afraid of anything that is evil because he trusts in the Lord. He gives. He's a giving man. And then verse 10, he is an impressive man. Even the wicked see it. The wicked even see a good man. Now we could talk about any one of those things. That's a great series of thoughts about a good man, but I want to consider verse number 4 and 5. We learn there about the good man is gracious. Now, someone asked me earlier, they said, when you say gracious, do you mean grateful or graceful? Let's think about being gracious. Notice what the psalmist says, verses 4 and 5. Verse 4, he is gracious, full of compassion and righteousness. Now, who is that? I think that's God. Because he's talking about how God works with this good man. God is gracious toward the good man. God is full of righteousness. He's full of compassion. So in the first place, God is gracious himself. Therefore, verse 5, the good man will be gracious. Why are we to be gracious people? Because God was gracious and is gracious to us. I like the way Michael said it. We can't count all of those blessings, not even possible, because God is gracious. And so I want to suggest to you that we think for a minute about how being gracious hinders or keeps us from grumbling. How is it that we can say if a person is gracious, they will not be grumblers? Okay, let's think about that for a minute. As an homage to Ron Murray, who's listening in. He texted me after this morning, so I have to do a C.S. Lewis reference, who said, the one who is always a grumbler will end up being grumbles. The grumblers will be grumbles. That's how it was. If you are a grumbler, you will end up being the grumbles, meaning that's just who you are. You're just the grumbles. You've become that. Well, we don't want to be that way. Now, I know what he's going to do. He's going to text after this lesson and say, you got it all wrong, Johnson. It's okay. I got the thought, I got the gist. More importantly, I gave the credit. Now, let's talk about how not to be grumbles. Be gracious. God is gracious. We should be gracious. Now, to understand being gracious, I want to suggest to you that being gracious means giving grace. To be gracious is to give grace. I spoke recently while we were out in Branson at Polishing the Pulpit, and one of the lessons they gave me was from Ephesians chapter 2. If you want to go over there for a minute, passage you know very well, but they assigned this to me, and I began with this thought, this statement. I've heard this many, many times in my ministry life. Maybe you've heard it too. I've been accused, or we in the Lord's church have been accused of being people who never talk about the grace of God. Well, I don't think they're right. I would beg to differ with them, because I think we are a people who understand to some degree the grace of God, but trying to grasp it, trying to get our minds around it, trying to understand it in a real practical and obvious way can be rather difficult. So let me offer to you this understanding of grace, because it will lead us into the concept of being gracious. Grace is all around us. No matter where we turn, we can see the grace of God. Every day, everywhere, all the time. Let's use this illustration. I've used it before with some tweaking. Right now, we are sitting in a room where we are surrounded by electricity. It's all around. When we come in, if this room is totally dark, we're still surrounded by electricity. I want to suggest to you that grace is the electricity of Christianity. For by grace you have been saved. Grace is the electricity of Christianity because it energizes us. It provides life to us. That's what grace from God does. For by grace you have been saved. God is the designer of grace. Jesus is the author of salvation, Hebrews 12:2. And so from God, the source and the author is how the grace is provided to us, has been provided to us. The Spirit. The Spirit of God is the wiring, delivering that energizing force. And we, by faith, plug into that energizing, not only when we are obedient to the Lord, coming into His family, immersed into Christ, we also plug in on a daily basis to access that grace from God. And it is our faith that allows us to plug in. Though this electricity is all around us, it is absolutely worthless to us if we don't plug in. Think about all of the people, All of the people in the world who are surrounded by the grace of God, but never desire or take the time to plug in and to take advantage of His special benefits. Now, every day they get up, they take advantage of the grace of God. The sun shines, the seasons change, food is grown. All of these things are a part of the grace of God, and they take advantage of that. But you have to plug in specially, obviously, to take full advantage of the grace of God. And that's exactly what I want us to think about for a few minutes concerning being gracious. To be gracious people, to give grace. Now that's our idea for this evening, to say if we are going to climb the mountain and we want to lighten our burden, we want to get rid of the weight, as the text says in Hebrews 12, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us, and run with patience the race that is set before us. We have to be able to be people who can take the weights of the world and remove them from us so that we can run. We're in, I guess, the final stages, but we've been in this Olympic time. And I love the things like the track and field. I had that on working today, watching the men's 100-meter dash. I love the swimming and the effort and the energy and the power of those people who have dedicated all of their time. And man, you know what they do? They do everything they can to carry the least weight that they can carry. They don't want to be weighed down. With our illustration of electricity and plugging in, I want you to notice with me how we are people who, if we are gracious, God will use us. If I plug into Him, God will use me. He will use you for His service. For instance, many of you, many of us, might have in our homes plugged into an outlet some kind of fragrant diffuser. The Bible says that when we are His people, when we plug into Him, we become a diffuser that He uses, 2 Corinthians chapter 2. In fact, he says, through us, the fragrance of God is diffused. When the diffuser is working at home, you walk in the room, wherever it is, if it's down the hall, doesn't matter. It has filled the house and you can smell it. Of course, if somebody hasn't taken the trash out in a while, that diffuses as well. And you probably have smelled that too. The idea is that God wants me and you to be a diffuser of His. People get to experience the fragrance of God through us. And that's being gracious. So, people who grumble and complain and yet claim to be God's people plugged into Him, what is the fragrance that people think about God? because of what these grumblers and complainers do. I want to be a diffuser. Number two, when we plug into the grace of God, God will use us as His Bluetooth speaker. We got this box in the mail this week, addressed to us. I didn't order it. Rebecca didn't order it. Opened it up, and it's this other box. And it's this Bluetooth speaker. Now, it's not one of these. It's one of these. And so I looked at it. I didn't order it, so I'm a little nervous. And I looked it up online. $500. Man, send it back. Or at least find out if I paid for it or not. If I didn't pay for it, I get to keep it. So I get to checking it out. I missed an email. Apparently, when I switched internet, they sent me a Bluetooth speaker. When we are speaking for God, when we are speaking God's words, we are, in the same vein, Bluetooth hooked to Him. Because we should be speaking what He wants us to speak. We should be speaking what we are connected to Him to speak. Like we said this morning, let no corrupt word come out of your mouth. But Peter would say in 1 Peter 2 and in verse 9, he calls us out. We are a different people. We're plugged in. And therefore I am His speaker. God calls us to speak. But I'm not speaking of my own accord. I'm speaking of Him. And grumbling and complaining is not God speaking. And I should be gracious as a speaker. And third, when we plug in, we become His light, His rechargeable light. Zach came over to my house to work on some electrical stuff. Well, I had gotten this new rechargeable light, and it's a work light, and it's just cool. Well, he had never seen one. And when he finished all that work, the nut did not want to be paid. I'll fix you, buddy. So I just bought him one of those lights. He loves it. And it's a lot of features. It does a lot of stuff. And when it's one run down and not doing as well, you just plug it up and recharge it. Isn't that what we are? Aren't we attached to the marvelous light of God? 1 Peter 2 and 9. And don't we sometimes wear down? Don't we sometimes need recharging? Isn't that why God wanted us to meet together on the first day of the week? To recharge? How many times have you heard a prayer on a Wednesday night where somebody says to recharge us in the middle of the week? The idea is we are God's light. And through Him, not only are we shining His grace, but we recharge, staying connected to Him, staying plugged up. We continually recharge ourselves as the light of God, shining the grace of God to everybody. I think it is important for us to address how to be gracious. How am I going to be gracious? Everybody in here says, yeah, we need to be gracious. The psalmist said, here's what a good man does. He is gracious. And notice it says, he is gracious and lends. I think that's because the word gracious or grace is a giving word. It just is. It's a giving word. And therefore, when we are gracious, we are giving people. So how are we gracious people? How does someone evidence being gracious? Well, let's think about a few ways that maybe we can do that. One would be that we are able to say when someone is offensive to us, when someone attacks us, when someone is mean to us, we don't respond with another mean thing. To be gracious means, oh yeah, they wronged me. But you know what? Here's how I'm going to respond. Didn't Jesus say that by doing that, you pour cold water on them? People are going to grumble. People are going to complain. And I want to make sure that I don't respond in kind. And that is gracious. I think it also means that I can admit when I'm wrong. Maybe when they come to me, I simply say, you know, you're right. I've messed up. I'm wrong. I admit it. And sometimes when people come with criticism and you simply say, you're right, it just deflates the situation. Maybe they came with an attacking mentality. And they wanted you really to stand up against them and to challenge them. And you just simply say, you're right. You calm the situation. You calm it down. Therefore, I think I should think the best of people. It is sad to me to lose a sense of optimism. I don't want to think badly of people. I just don't. And I don't think you do either. But because of stuff that we put up with, things that we see, things that we hear, we sort of become jaded, don't we? And we start thinking that things are probably not good. I just don't want to live that way. I don't want to. I want to think the best. And I think when we try to think the best of people, then we're being gracious to them. We're being gracious because we're giving them a chance. What are we giving them a chance to do? Here's the best one to me. We are gracious when I think of people through the lens that I too am sometimes at fault. When I look at someone else and they're having problems and things that they look mean and nasty and ugly, and then I can look through the lens that says, you know, I'm not sure I know everything that's going on in their life. But I've had trouble in my life. I've messed up. I've been mean. I haven't followed good procedure that God wants us to follow. And I can say, yep. But I want to look through the lens that says, your shortcomings are no different than my shortcomings. And if I'm willing to look at you through the lens of my shortcomings, I think I'm more gracious. Because grumbling and complaining oftentimes is a way to say or to deal with one's own guilt, one's own problems. Sometimes grumblers down deep know there's a problem with their own lives, and instead of dealing with it, they just lash out at everybody else. I want to be a gracious person. I want to learn to give grace. Now, granted, God, who is gracious, one day is going to end everything, and Judgment Day will have arrived. Yes, when there's a problem, it needs to be confronted. But there's a way to confront without being confrontational. And that's where graciousness comes in. Because that's going to work in every phase of life. What if you have a religious disagreement with somebody? You think this and they think this. Can that be confronted? Absolutely. Let's talk. I want to hear what you have to say. And I will tell you what I think. And that's confronting the issue. But being confrontational would be, that's wrong. What's your problem? Don't you know if you don't change that, you can't be saved? I remind you, I used the story one time of hearing one of our brethren, not here, I was elsewhere, met someone in the lobby of the church building, visitor. Do you have a church? Yeah, I go to so-and-so church down the road. Well, don't you know if you don't stop that and start coming here, you're lost? Guess what? He stopped coming here and kept going there. That's confrontational. It's not gracious. Let us be gracious people. We give grace because God gave grace to us. We think the best of people. We try to work through situations. We keep in mind that we have been wrong sometimes too. And I want to see everybody through that lens, that I've been wrong and I want to give you a chance to iron out the situation. It's real simple when you think about it. You want to be a grumbler or do you want to be gracious? Tell you what else is simple. It's easy to grumble. It's a lot more difficult to be gracious. That's why grumbling is childish. But being gracious is what is the road to spiritual maturity. Let us be gracious people, even meeting grumbling with a gracious mentality. Let us be individually and congregationally known for our grace given to others. God's grace allowed every one of us another opportunity tonight to hear His Word, to be improved by it, to be examined by it. And as I walk away from this, I'm examining myself. And as you walk away from this, I hope you'll examine yourself. But if there's something you need us to help you with, we always close with that opportunity. Let's stand and sing together.
We hope that you enjoyed today's broadcast, brought to you by the Richmond Church of Christ. We are located at 1500 Lancaster Road in Richmond, Kentucky. We meet at 9 a.m. each Sunday morning for Bible class, followed by our morning worship service held at 10 a.m. Our Sunday evening service is held at 6 p.m. Our midweek Bible study is held on Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you are in the area, we would love to have you as our honored guest. Thanks for listening.